In a world divided by fear, one man must stand alone against the forces of darkness. From the studio that inexplicably sewed his fucking mouth shut the first time, comes 5-time Academy Award viewer Ryan Reynolds as a man on an e-harmony date with destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you... me, Deadpool. So, get ready to blow out your collective sphincters, because my trailer is coming.
Hello, Internet, and welcome to Esoteric Smackdown, Superhero Edition. I'm Aubrey Forrest, the Modern Alchemist. So, what is Esoteric Smackdown? This is someplace where I like to just have fun with popular culture, and the idea then is to look at what certain things are what stories are being told in popular culture, and then using the tools that we have learned through the language of alchemy, decrypting these stories into what's actually being told. And so that's really the fundamental purpose of Esoteric Smackdown, is to have fun, to use the language and tools that we've learned in alchemy and then apply it to the stuff that we see outside of ourselves, the stuff that is part of the prevailing consciousness, the popular culture. And by doing that, then we can tie ourselves into it at a deeper level where it has a greater level of meaning and therefore a greater degree of productive yield for yourself as you're working through your own alchemical processes. I've chosen Deadpool as the first hero for our Esoteric Smackdown and for our discussion here. And the reason for it is because the movie actually fulfilled all of my expectations regarding Deadpool. I prior to the movie, I didn't have a great deal of interest in the character. Ryan Reynolds is absolutely awesome, and his characterization of Deadpool is spot on. So the idea of Deadpool is actually that he goes through an alchemical transmutation. And that was my expectation, was to actually see that happen. And so as a part of Esoteric Smackdown, we're going to use that movie and what Wade Wilson undergoes from cancer until Deadpool and becoming the superhero. And as a means of teaching you the process from nigredo to rubedo, which the four alchemical processes of transmutation. And so that's what we're going to do. But before we get started, it's important to recognize that every system has a code or a set of rules. And with regard to this set of rules in Esoteric Smackdown, think more Pirates of the Caribbean code, sort of, you know?
First, your return to Sorrow was not part of our negotiations nor our agreement, so I must do nothing. And secondly, you must be a pirate for the Pirate's Code to apply, and you're not. And thirdly, the code is more what you call guidelines than actual rules. Welcome aboard the Black Pearl.
Yeah, now you got the feeling. So it's more guidelines, really, than a specific code, because these are artistic presentations of what I believe are Kabbalistic principles, which are then borne out in the presentation of superheroes. And so if you use that language and apply it to the hero and their archetype and what they are, then you really will understand who they really are. So here are some essential rules. Are you ready? I'll try to pop them right here. Rule number 1, the superhero identity is the actual identity of the character. Let's take a look at this clip from Watchmen. It's awesome. Okay, that's like, whoa, right? And of course, people are like, why did he tear the skin off? And then why are they the superhero under the skin? It's because this persona of being a normal person, that's the disguise. And in spite of what Kill Bill says, or Bill says in Kill Bill, and this is, by the way, one of my favorite observations regarding rules relating to superhero mythology. Here, check this out.
A staple of the superhero mythology is there's the superhero and there's the alter ego. Batman is actually Bruce Wayne. Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker. When that character wakes up in the morning, he's Peter Parker. He has to put on a costume to become Spider-Man. And it is in that characteristic Superman stands alone. Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman. When Superman wakes up in the morning, he's Superman. His alter ego is Clark Kent. His outfit with the big red S, that's the blanket he was wrapped in as a baby when the Kents found him. Those are his clothes. What Kent wears, the glasses, the business suit, that's the costume. That's the costume Superman wears to blend in with us. Clark Kent is how Superman views us. And what are the characteristics of Clark Kent? He's weak. He's unsure of himself. He's a coward. Clark Kent is Superman's critique on the whole human race.
Okay, so in spite of what Bill says here, where Superman goes to bed as Superman and he wakes up, he's absolutely right. But since then, other heroes have emerged who also, whether they wear a costume or not, they're always that person. Okay, they can't not be that hero anymore because it's a composite of their physical being. But in terms of like the difference between Superman and Batman, for instance, even though Batman, like Owlman, he says, I am Batman, and the truth is that identity has sublimated, it's absorbed his birth identity as Bruce Wayne, right? Well, that hero still has to get his utility belt on, right? He still has to get his cowl and his mask and get in the Batmobile. And Superman, whether he wakes up or sleeps, he's always Superman. In the same instance, so is Deadpool. So the costume then really becomes his second skin. And this is another example of that Watchmen clip I showed you, where the hero's skin is the costume. Every element of the hero's costume then literally speaks to the nature and power of the character being examined. So the costume itself is the actual skin of the hero. And when you take this into account, it also applies to Star Trek characters, which we'll talk about in a future date. But realize that the uniform that is worn in Star Trek it's the same for them as a superhero costume, which is why I always find it funny in Star Trek when you see someone sick and they lay on the sickbay bed. They never get out of their clothes, right? Even if it's some horrible injury, they're still in their clothes regardless of the degree of stress. And that's because they are the uniform, that they are embodying something greater than the actor or the guy or whatever. It's a principle. And so in the same context, then the hero's costume is an embodiment of that principle. The colors and where they're worn and the degree to which the character's actual physical skin is showing, like with Superman, it's just his hands and his head from the neck up. That's the only actual skin that ever is revealed with Superman. But the beauty of it is these are the actual identifiers. There's nothing hidden, right? My hands are visible and my face is completely visible. It identifies Superman as a different kind of hero than Batman, right? So keep in mind then that all of this then will tie into the mythological references that the heroes are playing to. So now, The principles at play in every superhero story are as follows. There's usually 3 principal planetary influences at play in every superhero story, and these follow a Kabbalistic pattern identical to what could be chained out in the Tree of Life. So you have the agent of the sun, which is an agent of chaos, life, and salvation. You have Jupiter and Mars here, and this is your preserver and your destroyer. And then you have Saturn, the lawgiver, back up here at Binah, and that is your lawgiver, your judge, your jury, and your executioner. The sun can be considered an agent of protection and salvation, but more often than not, the sun is portrayed as an element of chaos and disruption within the story. A classic solar villain then would be the Joker, that's wonderfully portrayed in the Nolan's Dark Knight movie, wherein the Joker himself, he conveys himself as an agent of chaos, which is an actual descriptive of how I've explained that to you guys. Here, check this out.
I just did what I do best. I took your little plan and I turned it on itself. Look what I did to this city with a few drums of gas and a couple of bullets. You know what I noticed? Nobody panics when things go according to plan. Even if the plan is horrifying. If tomorrow I tell the press that like a gangbanger will get shot, or a truckload of soldiers will be blowing up, nobody panics. Because it's all part of the plan. But when I say that one little old mare will die, well, then everyone loses their minds. Introduce a little anarchy. Upset the established order, and everything becomes chaos. I'm an agent of chaos. Oh, and you know the thing about chaos? It's fair.
So you can see the Joker, he's literally, he's telling you, I'm an agent of chaos. Now, here's a little sidebar. Most of you, or not most of you, but some of you may have noticed that Ledger's portrayal of the Joker has this tongue flicking all the time. Okay? The reason for this is because the Joker is also Quetzalcoatl, right? He's the white-faced serpent deity of chaos and destruction. And he's constantly doing this really amazing tongue flicking. It's like virtually impossible to do unless you practice it, and I've tried and I can't do it. But he's reported that he did it for any number of reasons, and yet when you see, for instance, scenes like when he is burning the cash, and the cash is set up just like a pyramid, and
No, so crazy as you look. I told you, I'm a man of my word.
and then he slides down the pyramid of the sun, right, which is essentially what they're representing, as Quetzalcoatl would at the equinox. And then, of course, everything burns, right? This is something that the sun would obviously say. So this portrayal, then, of the Joker is indicative of him as an agent of chaos, which is often what the sun does. But remember, the sun is also a preserver as well as a destroyer. And that's that Jupiter-Mars relationship, wherein an aspect of the sun embodied within the idea of Horus then mediates between the chaos and the strictness in between, and tries to find this balance. So and that, of course, is a role that Superman does quite often. He's the god of the sky. He is empowered by the sun, but his heritage is still Saturnian, right? So it's still grounded in that. Now, these are just some of the rules. The other rules that are important to consider, for instance, you need to examine the hero's face. Much about the hero can be revealed by what is shown or not shown as a part of their heroic presentation. So, what is conspicuous about Batman is that he is all completely clad from head to foot, and the only thing that's visible is his mouth. which then tells you that this is a presentation of Saturn. Saturn rules speech and hearing, right? And so the bat sees with their ears, and he speaks, and he represents severity. Of all the heroes, Batman is by far the most severe. Pure Saturnian justice being meted out by him. So the absence of anything else visible on Batman is indicative of the nature of the hero itself, right? As opposed to Batman, now take a look at Deadpool or even Spider-Man, where they have no mouth and they have these oversized emphasis on their eyes. This then is indicative of a solar image because the sun rules vision, right? So it gives you a sense that the hero then is embodied by solar principles as opposed to Saturnian principles. And they can be clad in Saturnian clothes but still embodying solar principles, which is in fact exactly what Deadpool does. Continuing on then, so the superheroes who conceal their identity and work generally under the concealment of night would be considered of Saturnian bent, right? So they're always working in darkness, and those heroes which conduct their business in the daytime, in broad daylight, would be considered of solar influences. And again, this is the two pillars being revealed, right? The light and the dark. And their approach to the goals are different. It's skewed based upon their perspective. But by studying this, you actually learn Kabbalah simply by studying superheroes, which is why it's fun. So, finally, the eyes of the heroes have to be taken into consideration as to their color and their nature, because that tends to also reveal a bit about their mythological character reference, as well as the source of their sentience. And so like Batman, whose eyes are, his cowl essentially, he's doing what Daredevil is doing, which is he's supposed to be blind, right? And so the holes of the eyes, the eye holes are more essentially convenience for the Batman costume, which is why Christian Bale and everyone always blacks out the eyes, and it's just the whites of their eyes that's showing, because technically Batman doesn't use his eyes, right? He's using his ears, like Daredevil would use his radar sense. So the color of the eyes then reveal something about the consciousness of the individual. If they're white or white gold, like Deadpool's eyes, when he puts his little thing on, boom, his eyes are now these bulgy white globes. And this is because he's driven by solar consciousness, and as is Batman, right? And it's that aspect of solar consciousness that allows Batman to break the rules. Because objectively, Batman understands that he's as much of a criminal as the people he's pursuing. But there's a degree of chaos within Batman that allows a degree of cognitive dissonance and says, no, it's okay, because I got to take the Joker down, the greater good. And that's what Saturn would weigh out in the balance, right? Okay, so now you're getting kind of a feel of how Esoteric Smackdown plays out. So, but just remember, these are just guidelines, right?
The code is more what you call guidelines than actual rules.
And so don't get snagged up in the details, because you'll see it's all going to start to pull together really easily shortly. Now let's talk about Deadpool. Deadpool is, the movie begins with this delightful clip, right? The first question actually asked in the movie is asked by the cab driver that's taking Deadpool to the location where he's going to intersect with the person he's chasing.
Wide open there.
Pool. Dead.
Why the fancy red suit, Mr. Poole?
And he asked the question, he says,
Why the fancy red suit, Mr. Poole?
why the fancy red suit, Mr. Poole? And that question, even though Ryan Reynolds gets snarky and says as he's like it's Santa Claus, it's Christmas, and he's looking for people on his naughty list. And when later on the freeway he talks about how, hey, this isn't your normal superhero movie, he's breaking that fourth wall again, and discussing, hey, you got to know how I got into the suit. And the point of it is that everyone's missing is the suit is the key. Why the fancy red suit? Why is it a red suit? that was, when I saw that in a trailer, I was like, oh, it's going to be about alchemy. I just know it's going to be talking about Rubedo, and guess what? It does. So, with that excitement said, let's start breaking Deadpool down, all right? The movie, the main character is Wade Wilson, and the fact that you have a paired set of W's is a quick indicator that we're talking about a Saturnian character, all right? The two W's together then form the seal of Saturn, right? You take one W and you flip the other one on top and bingo, there you got it. And I've shown you this in other videos. So Wade Wilson then is a Saturnian character, and he's locked in a Saturnian kind of pursuits where he is meting out a small-scale justice in benefit of other people who can't represent themselves. So this is Saturn balancing the scales, all right, to make sure that everyone's okay, and using whatever necessary means is necessary in order to do it, which is what you see in the movie, right? He shakes that dude down, and he doesn't mind being funny about it. You have to remember that part of Saturn's character later emerges Kabbalistically into Mercury, and Mercury, in addition to his many traits, is also the patron of thieves. He's the patron god of thieves, and which, of course, that just tells you something, right, about the character, that there's an aspect of a scoundrelness involved. You get that Harrison Ford and Han Solo emerging, right? It's often can be a character who doesn't really see themselves as a hero, but actually still is, because farther up the tree, that's actually their root. So anyway, Wade Wilson begins the movie, and he's got cancer. Now, if you remember in some of my earlier videos, like Why Nature Sucks, I go at length and I talk about the idea of Cancer, both as a zodiac sign and also its positionality relative to the intensity of the sun at that time of year, wherein the sun is so intense that all rules about nature which could be cooperative are broken, and everything grows, and whatever can grow will grow, and it's all competition, okay? From a Saturnian perspective, which seeks after order and all things must have their place, from the perspective of the Buddha representing that idea and saying, look inward and notice the difference between what is within and what is without, meaning literally, if you look at how your body functions, the liver stays where it belongs, and the kidneys stay where they belong, and the heart stays where it belongs, and everything cooperates so that all of you can exist as a person, right? Even the bacteria in your body system cooperate with you so that you can digest things, and so that your skin's healthy and you remain healthy, right? Cancer is when the organism is set against itself, when the rules are broken. So suddenly your lungs don't stay where the lungs are supposed to, and the liver doesn't stay where it's supposed to, and it begins to become something different, and it grows wildly and out of control to the detriment of the organism. Similarly, outside, that growth during summer, anyone who's ever had a garden and tried seriously to garden understands that everything grows in the summer, and it's a great deal of work to keep your garden as you would like it, right? Especially if you go organic, you really have to pull those weeds. So this is the idea of Cancer. Wade Wilson, a Saturnian, now is infused with solar energy, which is breaking up his body, and it's causing him to make choices that he ordinarily wouldn't make, which has broken his perfect relationship with the perfect mirror opposite of him, right? If you were to pair it, it would be an Osiris-Isis pairing, and she has the perfect hair for Isis, and that awesome romance, right? Where Isis actually is on top, and during their sexual encounters, that often is the case between them, because if you look at a being, top to bottom, as we've discussed in other videos, the upper part would be receptive feminine, right? You eat and everything comes in through the mouth and the eyes and the ears, and then the southern pole is masculine projective. And so the Osiris-Isis pairing then is a description of a singular planet, which would be Saturn. So again, Wade Wilson is Saturn, and he's infused with solar energy, which is destroying him, giving him cancer, and he has to go in and he seeks an unorthodox treatment. And the treatment promises mutation. And of course, as an alchemist, we deal with transmutation, which is going beyond simple mutation, beyond one thing into something entirely different. And this is exactly what happens. So he goes through a torturous period where they inject him, and don't forget this, you might have not noticed it right away, but they spend a little camera time on it, on this amber liquid with red flecks in it, okay? This will be referenced later, but so that you know, at the beginning of the movie now, we have what is called the Nigredo. This is the beginning stages. This is where everything that was originally you is burnt out, or originally the item in question, the chemical or composite in question, is burned, and it's Nigredo means it turns black. And in the same sense, Wade Wilson goes through his process. He becomes, his transmutation is he kind of becomes a cancer man, where he can regenerate anything, and it looks like his whole body is basically just cancer. Then he's burned to death, and then reemerges. He's burned to death on a what looks like a shepherd's hook, which again would be a reference to Abel, which is a reference to Saturn as a shepherd, right? So all of these Saturnian references are piling up on Wade Wilson, and then he's burned to death, and he rises like the phoenix from his own ashes, completely covered in black. And now that is the Nigredo in complete form. So Being, the movie, completely does that right. And I'm like, this is awesome. Wait for what's next. And so he then decides he wants to have this thing sorted out. He wants the balance. So this is the Saturnian drive saying, I want justice. I want to be made right. And he puts on, of all colors, a white costume. Now remember, the rules are that the costume then becomes the skin of the person. So this is where Deadpool assumes his albedo. The whitening, where the greater composite of his energy, the greater composite of his being then is coming forward. And his particular albedo is very short-lived, and it has this wonderful intersection in the laundromat, where he's trying to get the red out because he keeps getting stabbed everywhere, and he's bleeding, and his costume is turning red. So by virtue of the ardor that he's going through in order to hunt down the guy who's responsible and make everything right, he is emerging in his rubedo. And what it takes is another Saturnian reference in order to point this out, and this is brilliantly played by a black actress who, I believe it's Nichelle Nicholas. In fact, I believe that's who it was. And she's got glasses on, and she's blind, and yet she knows that his costume is red. And she says, hey, dipstick, why don't you just get a red costume? And this is Saturn advising the alchemist in his own transmutation to just kick it up a notch, because you're already there anyway. And so he then steps it up, and now he has his red costume, which is a rubedo. Now, for those of you alchemists out there, you're all freaking out and going, wait, he forgot about the citrinatus. Well, that actually was represented throughout the entire process. They cheated a little bit. That's why don't let your head explode or anything. But the citrinatus is exhibited in the drug which he is given, and at the very, very beginning to catalyze his transmutation. And so by it being represented there, and that being the catalyst for all subsequent mutations and evolutions of his consciousness, it's present, and it also bore the promise of rubedo within it, with the red flecks that were inside of it. So I thought overall that was really wonderful. So so this then is Deadpool then exhibits clearly your process from Nigredo to Rubedo in the great work. So there's more. There's more. So now just by looking at the colors and the progression of the story, this is one element of the movie that is done very well. In addition to this, Now we need to look at his costume, and we can see that in fact he has very serpentine qualities, meaning that, for instance, at the beginning of the movie, he slinks somehow through this tiny aperture between the back seat of the taxi and the front seat, and then slides in and then sits properly next to the cab driver.
Kind of lonesome back here.
Little help here.
Excuse me.
Dopinder.
Pool. Dead.
Why the fancy red suit, Mr. Poole?
In that first clip where he says, "Hey, Mr. Poole, why the red suit?" That is a reference again to him being the serpent. Then, of course, the eyes, the oversized reference to the eyes being the predominant feature. This is a clear clue in that it's the serpent reference. Serpent references are always, are typically, I will say, almost always refer to the sun. There are a few that may refer to Venus, but by and large, if it's relating to transmutation or protection or destruction, then it's solar. So him bearing these oversized eyes, and then the fact that they turn into these little white globes, is a clear indication that he is solar driven. And the other thing that I think is beautifully done here is the fact that his consciousness is aware of everything, because the sun is all-knowing, being the source point of immediate consciousness for this vicinity, right? So all electromagnetism is emanating from our star down onto our Earth and in turn to us, and in keeping us going consciously, right? And Deadpool then exhibits this awareness by being aware both of himself as a fictional character and other fictional characters and all the other possible universes. One of my favorite references is when he's being drug off by Colossus to the mansion, and he says, "Which Professor X is it going to be? Is it McAvoy or Stewart? And which timeline am I in?" And that's beautiful, because the sun is aware of all these things, and therefore the sun, as a joker, as a jester, can break the fourth window and talk directly to the audience, because the sun knows that it is also part of the audience. So that is also a fantastic example of Deadpool. Now, at the beginning I said I know why Fox decided to sew Deadpool's mouth shut in Wolverine Origins. It's if you notice, he didn't get a costume, and so his skin was his costume, therefore they needed to sew his mouth shut in order to stay true to the character. Just stupid, you know. I'm not going to defend it beyond that, but that literally is the reason. It's an exhibition of Deadpool there as a solar character, but the idea of the arms with the swords, that's like your Edward Scissorhands, right? Where everything it touches, it also damages at the same time. Those are all kind of solar imagery that was used, and of course the eye beams. This then gives you that Ray Horicity that drops him down a notch. He's no longer the sun, but he is also Horus, and so he bears the red eye beam powers. So that presentation of Deadpool in Wolverine Origins was trying to kind of draw on multiple different iconic references within the mythology and Kabbalistically, and then fuse it all into one person, but it was just too much, and it was not traditionally true to the character, which is why it wasn't accepted. So this is the interesting thing about popular culture, is it has its own built-in immune system. So people, when they see something that's not quite right, it will trigger that immune system and it'll be rejected, like with Deadpool not having his costume and having his mouth shut. But him, in fact, his character with his mouth not visible and no ears visible, just eyes, then clearly indicates that Deadpool is a solar character. So what we have then for our first Esoteric Smackdown, I know it was a long journey, but the future ones will be built upon this one. So in other words, I won't have to explain the rules to you again. You guys already know the rules and you'll be looking for them. The rules are part of the language, and the language is all part of the game. it's what makes it rewarding, but it also is what enables us to tie our consciousness to a greater aggregate consciousness. And that's really a large part of what the end game is to expand your consciousness, to elevate your consciousness by really any means necessary that doesn't cause harm, right? And so take advantage of every opportunity and discount nothing as an opportunity to be taught or to learn or to progress. And that's why superheroes are probably some of my favorite, is because these things are embedded in us. We all know who Batman is, or the Joker, or Superman, or maybe the Green Arrow because of the show now, and the Flash, and we know who the Fantastic Four are. We've encountered the X-Men time and again. You know, these things are now part of who and what we are, and part of our language when we talk to each other. And because of that, it empowers those of us who seek to use that language as a means of shortcutting and conveying larger groups or sections of consciousness, much like in the Darmok episode that I talked about quite some time ago, relative to how language works in Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 5, Episode 2, Darmok. And you can look for that in the playlists as well here on the Modern Alchemist channel. All right, I think I've covered pretty much everything, but now you see Deadpool is more than just a superhero without a mouth, but with a mouth. He's actually an exhibition, an embodiment of the great work, taken artistically and metaphorically stage by stage until at last he is transformed and transmuted. He exceeds himself, and as a result of his character changing, he then is accepted by his other half, right? At the end of the movie, his girlfriend loves him. Yeah, you've seen the movie, you guys. I'm not ruining it. If you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to feel bad. It was super cute, and I didn't tell you about the guy he shoots in the head while okay, I just did. All right, that's it, you guys. Have fun at the movies. The next one I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start talking about Batman v Superman, because that stuff is awesome. The trailers look amazing, so we're going to talk about a couple of the trailers and discuss the dynamic between Batman and Superman. We've referenced it a little bit here, but we're going to nail that down in coming episodes of Superhero Esoteric Smackdown. And so stay tuned for that. Until then, I'll be talking to you soon. Take care.